I'm 79 years old. 6 months ago, I stood in the pouring rain and watched them lower my wife, Helen, into the ground. We were married for 52 years. At the wake, our friends and neighbors kept coming up to me, calling our marriage a shining example of American loyalty. They talked about us like we were a monument. They were dead wrong. Our marriage wasn't a monument to love. It was a 50-year-long Cold War, fought in total silence. In 1973, in the second year of our marriage, Helen made a choice. She had a brief, stupid affair. I found out, and while she was on her knees begging for a second chance, I did what a good Christian man was supposed to do. I looked her in the eyes and said, "I forgive you." But it was the biggest lie of my life. I didn't forgive her. I just realized that staying and slowly destroying her with my mercy would be a far more satisfying revenge than leaving. I spent 50 years as a jailer, and I lost my own soul in the process. I'm telling you this so you don't make the same catastrophic mistake. If you can't truly let it go, leave that very day. Otherwise, you'll both spend half a century dying while you're still breathing. To understand how I became this cold-hearted architect of misery, you have to understand the soil I was grown in. I am a child of the Midwest, raised by a father who was a World War II veteran. He was a man made of reinforced steel and absolute silence. In our household, feelings were considered a luxury we couldn't afford. There was only order, and there was the violation of order. If a tool broke, you fixed it. If it couldn't be fixed, you threw it in the scrap pile. You didn't weep over it, you didn't negotiate with it. This upbringing naturally led me to civil engineering. I loved the honesty of blueprints and the predictable nature of stress loads. A bridge doesn't lie to you. If the foundation is solid, it stands. If there is a structural flaw, the building is condemned. It's that simple, or at least I thought it was. I spent my youth studying concrete and tension, never realizing that the human heart doesn't follow the laws of physics. I thought I could build a life the same way I built a highway interchange, with precision, control, and zero margin for error. Then came Helen. I met her at a church picnic in the summer of 1971. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can smell the charcoal smoke and the sweet scent of her perfume. She was wearing this bright yellow sundress that seemed to vibrate against the dull, gray world I lived in. She was chaotic energy. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She talked to strangers. And she moved with a freedom that both terrified and obsessed me. I convinced myself I loved her. But looking back through the lens of 80 years, I see the truth. I wanted to possess that light. I wanted to take that beautiful chaos and lock it inside my clean, quiet house and teach it how to follow my rules. Our first year of marriage was a slow, systematic dismantling of her spirit. I called it guidance, but I taught her the correct way to stack the dishwasher to maximize efficiency. I showed her how to fold the linens so the edges were perfectly flush. I critiqued the way she hummed while she cooked, telling her it was distracting while I was reading my technical journals. I truly believed I was being a good provider, a steady rock for her to lean on. I didn't see that I was actually a cage, and the bars were made of my constant, quiet disapproval. She tried so hard to please me, shrinking herself down until she fit into the narrow, straight lines I had drawn for her. The breakdown happened in the sweltering summer of 1973. I was lead engineer on a massive bridge project 3 counties away. I was living on black coffee, nicotine, and ambition. I would come home after midnight, a ghost of a man covered in dust. Eat the cold dinner she left wrapped in foil, and go to bed without saying a word. I didn't ask how she felt. I didn't notice the loneliness in her eyes. I treated her like a reliable appliance that was simply expected to function in the background of my life. She was 24 years old, full of life, and I had turned her into an invisible shadow in her own home. The man was a telephone technician who came to fix a line. It lasted only 3 weeks. It wasn't some grand, cinematic romance. It was a desperate, gasping cry for air from a woman who was drowning in my silence. It was a moment of madness, born from the need to feel seen, even if it was by a stranger. When I found out, it wasn't because of some dramatic confession. I found a crumpled receipt in her coat pocket while I was looking for a pen. Just a name and a number. But in my engineer's mind, the structural flaw had been revealed. The foundation was cracked, and once a foundation is cracked, the entire structure is garbage. What followed was a silence so heavy, it felt like it had physical weight. For 2 weeks, I didn't utter a single syllable. I didn't scream, I didn't break plates. That would have been too human. Instead, I moved my things to the guest room and walked past her in the hallway as if she were made of thin air. I watched her disintegrate. She stopped sleeping. She would sit at the kitchen table for hours, staring at a cup of tea, her hands shaking so violently the china would rattle against the wood. She begged me to yell at her, to punish her, to do anything but ignore her. But silence was my most effective weapon. Eventually, our families and the church intervened. Our pastor, an old man who smelled like peppermint and leather-bound books, sat us down in his study. He spoke of the sanctity of the covenant and the infinite capacity for Christian grace. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Frank, a man is defined not by how he is hurt, but by how he forgives. Be the bigger man. Forgive her as you hope to be forgiven by the Almighty." In that moment, I didn't feel grace. I felt a cold, dark surge of power. I realized that if I left her, she would eventually heal and find happiness elsewhere. But if I forgave her and stayed, I would own her forever. So I stood up, adjusted my tie, and performed the most calculated act of my life. I looked at her shattered face and said, "I forgive you, Helen. We will never speak of this again." She fell to her knees, sobbing with a gratitude that broke my heart to witness now. But back then, it just fed my ego. Everyone praised me. I was the saint. I was the noble husband. But she didn't know that she had just walked into a high-security prison, and I had swallowed the key. From that day on, never speaking of it became my primary method of torture. We stayed in that house. We had 2 sons. On the outside, we were the quintessential American success story. My career flourished. I built bridges that people still drive across today. We had the manicured lawn, the station wagon, the church pew with our names on it. But inside the walls of our home, the air was perpetually thin. My sons grew up in a house where love wasn't a gift, it was a debt to be repaid. They saw a father who was perfect and principled, and a mother who spent every waking second apologizing for a crime she was never allowed to forget. I used my forgiveness to micromanage every aspect of her existence. If she wanted to buy a new dress, I'd give her a long, slow look until she put it back, knowing she felt she didn't deserve anything extra. If she laughed too loudly at a neighborhood barbecue, I'd touch her arm and whisper, "Let's maintain some dignity, Helen," and watch the joy vanish from her face like a light being switched off. I didn't have to say the word affair to remind her of it. It was there in every cold shoulder, every refused hug, every silent dinner. I made our bedroom a graveyard of intimacy for 50 long years. Decades rolled by like slow-moving freight trains. Boom, we became experts at the civilized, unhappy marriage. We held hands at our sons' graduations. We smiled for the Christmas cards. But at night, we lay 6 inches apart in a king-sized bed that felt like it was separated by 1,000 miles of frozen tundra. I watched the vibrant girl in the yellow dress slowly turn into a brittle, frightened old woman. Her laugh, that wild energy I once wanted to tame, was gone forever. She became a servant to my comfort, a ghost haunted by a judge who refused to ever close the case. And I told myself I was a hero for staying. When the cancer finally came for her, it was swift and merciless. It started in her lungs, a bitter irony for a woman who hadn't been allowed to breathe for half a century. In those final months, the power dynamic finally shifted, but not in the way I expected. As I had to carry her to the bathroom, feed her broth from a plastic spoon, and change her soiled sheets, the righteous anger I had nursed for 50 years began to taste like ash. I looked at her frail, translucent skin and saw, for the first time, not a sinner, but a human being I had spent a lifetime destroying. One night, the room was dark, lit only by the flickering green numbers of the heart monitor. she drifted into a brief moment of clarity. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, like a bird's claw. She whispered, "Frank, I tried so hard for 50 years to be what you wanted. Is the debt paid now? Can I go now? Please, I'm so tired of being sorry." I felt like the world had dropped out from under me. She wasn't asking God for entry into heaven. She was asking me for permission to die. She was still terrified of my disapproval, even at the edge of eternity. When the long, high-pitched beep finally signaled the end, I sat in that hard, plastic hospital chair and realized I was utterly bankrupt. I had spent my entire life being right, and all it bought me was a front-row seat to the slow death of the only person who ever truly tried to love me. I had been an engineer of misery. I had built a magnificent, perfect house out of resentment and pride, and I was the only person left inside it. I stayed with her not out of loyalty, but out of a sick need to feel superior, and the cost of that superiority was 2 wasted lives. After the funeral, the house became a tomb of neatness. Every clean countertop, every perfectly folded towel in the linen closet felt like a scream. I found an old diary she had hidden behind some cookbooks from the late 80s. One entry, dated on our 15th anniversary, said, "Frank says he forgave me, but he keeps the ledger in his eyes. I would rather he had left me in 1973. I would rather he had hit me once and walked away than to stay and make me a ghost for 1,000 years. I am dying in this silence. Now I sit here on this long sofa in this quiet, immaculate house, and I realize the truth. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else to make them feel better. It's the air you need for your own lungs. If you can't truly, deeply, and absolutely let a betrayal go, then leave. Don't play the martyr. Don't be the good man who stays just to become a jailer, because in the end, you'll find that while you were busy punishing them, you were serving the exact same life sentence. Don't wait until you're 79 and alone in a house full of shadows to realize that being right is the loneliest thing in the world."